Thank you for being here for the Steeltoe session. We're so excited. We've been busy. We've done a lot of work. We're so excited to share some of that here. So first, who are we? I'm Serilog. I'm an engineer on the Steeltoe team.
I'm Tim Hess. I'm also an engineer on the Steeltoe team.
Yep, and what we're covering today is what's available now in Steeltoe, what's new, what we've added in since our last appearance at Spring 1, and what's coming up next in Steeltoe, what are our plans. So this is a chance for you to give your feedback and have a voice in the product and development. And finally, we're going to finish with a demo of one app and many platforms.
So very briefly, we work for Pivotal. We're talking about stuff that's coming in the future, hopefully. Safe harbor statement, you're welcome.
You have 3 seconds to read it. So first, what is Steeltoe? Steeltoe is a .NET framework that provides libraries for quickly helping you easily use microservices in a production environment. Think of it as, Josh Long did mention it this morning, think of it as Spring Boot for .NET. It's not quite accurate because .NET is, first of all, a fantastic framework all on its own. And there's a lot of love that we get from the Spring ecosystem that we try to bring. And so there are goodies that we added that makes it easy for Java and .NET developers to work together and play together in the same place.
Just real quickly, show of hands, how many in the room would not identify with the phrase .NET developer? We got any primary Java folks? Yeah, obviously, Andrew, sure. All right.
Awesome. Well, that's great that there's so many of you here at a primarily Java conference. That's exciting. We have to let ourselves be known that we're here and have people drive the development of our products in this direction. So about Steeltoe. So we primarily have these areas of helping you with your microservices deployments. The first is scalability. So you have a microservices style architecture, and the reason you're doing that is monoliths are not easily scalable. So you've kind of split your app up into these kind of microservice architecture. So now you're going to have a few problems. This is the area where we're going to help you with, for example, things like discovery. And how does it help? Apps, services are ephemeral. They come in and go, and you're scaling them up and down as needed. So you don't want to scale your whole monolith up. You're scaling a little piece of it. And as you do that, things like discovery will help you discover new services that became available or things that went away. As well as config server, it helps you externalize your configuration, and that makes managing these diverse set of services that work together as a single application basically easier to manage. Next up, we have resilience. Primarily, what we mean by that is help with things like circuit breaker. If you're not familiar with the circuit breaker pattern, what it is if you have one part of your application go down, it shouldn't take away the rest of your application. You shouldn't spend too many threads trying to contact that service that is down. And this short circuits so to speak, the circuit so that your app can continue to be functional. Finally, we have connectors that help you use other services in an easy way. You want to add anything to that?
Nope.
Yeah.
Let's go faster.
All right, let's go faster. We have a lot of stuff to cover. Finally, we have observability. Under that, we have things like dynamic logger. What that does is it allows you at runtime to scale up and scale down the verbosity of your logs so that you can pinpoint the problem areas.
Down to the class level. So if you've got one specific area and you know it's a problem, dial it down to trace. If there's one noisy area, say an ASP.NET Core middleware that's just too noisy, turn it off completely and it'll get out of your way.
Yeah, and along those lines, there's management endpoints. There are different things like health endpoint, looking at your info, or ENV, or logger is one of the management endpoints, and there's various endpoints like that. Recent addition, we'll go into that shortly. I just saw Andrew. So distributed tracing. This is, again, when your application is a monolith, you have logs in one place, and it's easy to find where the problem is. But if you're distributed, you don't know the path that your application took to get to the problem, and distributed tracing is something that'll help with that. And finally, metrics. How are your app individual services doing, how is their health, and being able to watch all of that from a single pane of glass. And that brings us to
what's new in Steeltoe? Well, there's a couple of things that are new, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this slide, but we just wanted to give you an idea. We've been busy. So we're going to go ahead and break them down. We've got them categorized a little bit so we can follow along and not have too much brain ache with all this word soup. So we're going to start with the area of configuration. Go ahead. We've got some new configuration providers. If you're loving the Java Spring stuff, you may be familiar with property placeholders. With this, you can define something like what we've got in this first area where we've got an environment, maybe this favorite value is coming from somewhere else. If it's not found, you can do fallbacks, just all kinds of different ways to build your configuration. It can search recursively and resolve it from wherever in your configuration. The iConfiguration provider that Microsoft provides is how all this stuff is built. In order to add placeholders, it's the same as any other configuration provider. Is anybody unfamiliar with .NET configuration and what I'm talking about here? Everybody's good? It's pretty standard these days, so I'm glad you're familiar with it. Moving on, we added a random value provider, which, it's not super common to ask your configuration for random values, but sometimes you need a random integer or a random long. You never know when a random long is going to pop into your life, so just got to be prepared. If you ask for a random, and it's not found, you'll just get a random array of bytes. So what's super cool about random values is they actually plug in very nicely with the placeholders. So for example, if you want to spin up a variety of services, or a variety of instances on a given service, you can configure a random port value just like this. And that way you configure all these instances to spin up. They're all running on different ports, and you're good to go. Moving on with your testing. So that's about all I want to talk about with configuration. We're going to move on to service discovery and what's new here. Anybody heard of Consul before? We weren't working with it a whole lot in Steeltoe. Earlier this year, we got a community contribution, and now you can also use Steeltoe to do service discovery with Consul. So it works just the same as Eureka from a Steeltoe perspective. As far as adding it to your application, like from here, as a developer, you shouldn't care whether you're using service discovery on Eureka or you're using Consul. Just change your configuration as needed. Ready, set, go. Additionally, in service discovery, we made load balancing configurable. Previously, if you used Steeltoe Service Discovery, you got random load balancing out of the box, and that was it. You couldn't change it. It was baked in. That's what you got. We added a new interface for iLoad Balancer. It's a very simple interface, but it's effective. As it stands right now, you can continue using Service Discovery the way you've always been, or you can configure your load balancing. If you'd rather do round robin, or if you want to make up your own scheme for load balancing, you're free to do so. This load balancer is not tied to HTTP, so if you wanted to use it to load balance any form of URI scheme, you can do it for that. And we provided some handy extension methods for use with HttpClientFactory. Since I mentioned HttpClientFactory and it's brand new-ish, I wanted to make sure we mentioned what it is. Since we're here in the .NET space and we've been doing HTTP programming for a very long time, there have been some historical problems with HTTP client when it comes to either DNS going stale or sockets exhausting, whatever. Nobody wants to actually manage the life cycle of an HTTP client, so Microsoft added this guy to do it for you. Not only that, they added some very convenient ways to configure HTTP clients so you can use them in your application. So you can just say in your service, I want an HTTP client. I don't, at this point, care how it was built. But you can do this to do simple things like sharing authentication for different services across the board. So in order to add discovery to the HTTP client factory, now you can just say, well, I want an HTTP client and I want it to be random load balanced, or maybe I want it round robin load balanced. But this is the way to very easily get an HTTP client that is load balanced with service discovery. We did also have a way of doing service discovery without specifying the load balancer before. So this is how you just add the discovery HTTP message handler. I like the new load balancer methods Personally, I think they're cleaner, but they are, that last entry is functionally equivalent to the first entry.
All right. That brings us to next step. Next thing that's up is management. Now, how many of you are familiar with the Spring Boot actuator project in here? So we have a few people. Yeah, so that's kind of a similar flavor. What these are is basically endpoints that will help you manage your application. So some of the work that we've done these have been there for a long time in Steeltoe, and some of the work we've done now is to bring Parity to our cousin project, the Spring Boot actuator project, and make it more compatible. So what this lets you do is have the same features. For example, when you're in Cloud Foundry, you have the Apps Manager UI, the place where you're seeing your health, where you're seeing your info, ENV and all these things, loggers and scaling them up and down. This is how they work. So not only that, now we can also use other tools outside, which we will show shortly, which is be able to use these actuators outside. And some people have use their own applications to use this. So really a quick short list of what's actually changed is now the actuator's default mapping has changed to /actuator /info /health and so on. So that keeps them compatible. And we also have we didn't have till recently the ability to expose actuators both in Cloud Foundry and at the same time also have them be available outside. This is something that Spring Boot apps could do before. So now we're able to do that as well. So you can have other applications monitor and do things with them that are not tied to Cloud Foundry, right?
So on top of that, you no longer have to specify the base path of Cloud Foundry application. That was previously an annoying setting that you had to do. Now it just does it for you. You're welcome.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the kind of thing we're trying to do, is to bring reasonable defaults so that you don't have to worry about this. So these things stay out of your way and they're available for you to use unless you want to change something about them, and they're very flexible to change. So moving on. So we have the health endpoint now has the ability to show and hide details. Before you would see all of the details in the health endpoint. Now you can set that. So some companies have some security concerns around this that they don't want to show, especially all of the upstreams and how things are. So they just want simple up and down. So we can do that now with that setting. And thanks to contributions, we now have a DB migrations endpoint. Really quickly, that is a place where you can see the migrations that have run. And this is a .NET thing. I don't believe the Spring Boot guys have this, right?
I wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. So thank you for the contributions. Andrew's right here. Thanks. So finally, we have updated the schema for the things. The schema has drastically changed, and so we've gone from V1 to V2, and pretty soon the Spring Boot guys or V3 will be there. Next up, we have added support for Microsoft health checks. So there's a lot of health checks that are provided by the community under the Zavrel BeatPulse set of health checks. So these are health checks that are already built by the community, available for you. Previously, you could use this with the Microsoft middleware to check health, and Microsoft the framework has their own health check middleware, and if you add this, the health becomes available at /health. The thing about that, though, is it's not compatible with all of the other Spring ecosystems, such as Cloud Foundry or Spring Boot Admin. You'll see that. So what we've done is have the ability to have the health registrations that are specified by the community projects be available also in the health middleware, right? So it makes sense, right? So you have your health checks be added, and then when you go to /health, all of those automatically show up. Not only that, when you use the community health checks, typically you have to provide a connection string, and oftentimes, and Steeltoe actually does a really nice job with the connectors to actually make it easy to access the connection string. For example, if you're in Cloud Foundry, it would be made available to you. It'll parse the VCAP sort of things, and then it'll make it available right there, so it all works seamlessly. That's that about health checks. Moving on to Serilog dynamic log level management. Steeltoe has always had dynamic log levels, so you're able to use the logger actuator to actually set your how verbose you want your logs to be. So now we've added support for structured logging with Serilog. And so when you add the Serilog dynamic logger, you're able to change the same level, except you're specifying the configuration in the Serilog flavor, and also are able to specify structure and also be able to enhance these logs. And here I have an example. It doesn't quite format it like that, but if I didn't format it, it would be kind of pointless to show what I'm trying to show, which is that these are JSON structured strings. So it wouldn't be formatted like that, but that's what you would get. And finally, I think in management, we have management tasks, which enables the bundling of management type activities inside your application. What these are a one-time task that you would run, and the best case we found for that would be the entity framework migrations to run them on demand, but you can do whatever you want with that, and it pairs nicely with CF run task, and you'd run your application the same way with a run task parameter. So that
this is how you actually use it. You, in your ASP.NET Core application, you use your web host builder. And normally you would call .run. If you wanted to run with tasks, you can run with tasks. And it has a little hook in here where it will branch off and run your application in management task mode if you specify the right parameters.
Yep.
So.
Cool. That brings us to connectors.
Yes, connectors. Who doesn't need more connectors in their life? Over the last year, actually shortly after Spring 1 last year, I actually spent some time working on the eShop on containers, which, if you're not familiar with it, is Microsoft's way of doing things in the Docker Kubernetes world. So that particular solution is very large and very complex. And it probably took me about a month to get my head around it and figure out how to plug Steeltoe into it. And of course, now we're horribly out of date with it because they are contributing like mad to it. So we'll have to probably get back into it and refresh it. But out of that process, I came away with a MongoDB connector. So that's available now to use in Steeltoe. We work for Pivotal. Pivotal cares about Geo, Gemfire, and Pivotal Cloud Cache. We've had a few requests for getting that to work in Steeltoe. So now we've got some examples for how to do it. The one caveat is that you must use 64-bit applications and only running on Windows. That has to do with the underlying drivers. That's not a Steeltoe limitation. So they apparently have a huge amount of work to do to rewrite that in core, and that is going to take some time. So you'd have to work with them if you want to run it somewhere else. We also had a community contribution to add support for Oracle. So thank you to the community for that one. So next up is some real excitement for Oracle, eh? Not my personal favorite, but to each their own. We're not here to judge, we're just here to help you. So next up, we've got a very brief update on security. Steeltoe provides a few security libraries. The biggest ones that we provide are probably for authentication. So if you want to do .NET on Cloud Foundry, you can use the Steeltoe authentication libraries for making it easier to work with UAA or Pivotal SSO. These libraries haven't gotten the most attention over the years, so in the past year, we did a little bit of refactoring with it. We pulled out some of the common logic that existed between the three auth libraries that we had and put it in a central location and made sure that there was some feature parity across them. So now you can do things like OpenID Connect in ASP.NET Core. There you go, sir.
So what's up next is the Steeltoe, Steeltoe Initializer. So those of us that are coming from the Java Spring ecosystem, they've kind of had the initializer for a while. So we have a similar experience with Steeltoe to help you get started quickly with Steeltoe libraries and things that are available. If nothing else, it's a place to discover all the things Steeltoe provides. So I'm going to quickly drop in and show.
Oh man, I hope we can find that slide again.
What did I do? All right, we'll try. So that's your, still has the big beta tag on there. We're looking for your help to make it better and give feedback, of course. But what's there should work today. We have most of our stuff, it's not all of it, we have more stuff than that under Steeltoe, but you can quickly get started with all of these things, and it's nice to be able to see what's there if you don't know what you're looking for. If you know what you are looking for, you can start typing, and it'll help you with the type ahead. And you pick your dependencies, and you generate the project, and just downloads it just like, and if you are so inclined, you can use curl. So we're going to extract this out, and I usually work on a Mac, so I'm slightly unfamiliar. All right, what are we doing? We're doing code, right? So
I click down here. Are you doing code?
Yeah, no, let's do, let's do.
Take your pick.
Yeah, let's do PowerShell and pretend like we're on a Mac for a few seconds. And what this generates for you is a very basic .NET app, not unlike what you'd get when you do a .NET New project, except first, of course, you have the Steeltoe dependencies added for you as depending on the dependencies you picked, of course. And also, it gets you the correct version. So if there's a later version, you can expect that this will be the best place to get the correct version, and we'll try to keep that up to date. And it also generates the basic stuff that you need to add. So we said we wanted Cloud Foundry, so adds these little helpers that will help it be better for you to run in Cloud Foundry. When you said you wanted actuators, it also added the dynamic console, because when you go to the logger endpoint, it will be able to turn up and down the logging. So all this is done for you. If you were in Spring, you would do a at Spring Boot application, and you would download the actuator dependency. It does all that. But Microsoft, we have a different flavor of how we want to do these sort of things, and we use our configure services, and we add our dependencies to the service container, and also add any middlewares. So all this is done for you, so you don't have to discover and look at docs, and it's up and available for you to run. Not only that, you can just take this code as is, right? Let's see if I remember the shortcuts. Yeah. Are we in the right place? I think so, right?
Yep.
So you can just do a CF. Can you guys see that? It's barely usable. So what do we call this? Yeah. So you're going to push on top of that right there.
So that might take a minute.
Yeah, so while it's baking, I'll just, I mentioned the curl. You also have this .NET New experience. So really quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, we're short on time, but the way this is built on top of the Microsoft .NET template engine. So it's the same template engine that's running behind the scenes, but we also have a different implementation that allows it to be much more scalable for a web application. So while we're publishing that, we're also publishing a template that when you install, you're able to see a .NET Steeltoe microservice available, with your templates. So then what you can do is, I'm gonna go to a different directory. Let's make a new one. Yeah, doing this all for the first time here, so on this computer. All right, so .NET New, you want to say Steeltoe Web API. We also have a React template that we're working through, but the Steeltoe Web API template is, you can start using that, -- actuators, for example, and -- Cloud Foundry. Basically the same thing we've done earlier on the web UI, except we're using .NET New now. And so it should create, and I'm not going to, so it restored it. So I'll quickly show you the startup.cs. You'll basically see the same things available here. Exactly the same thing. We have tests ensuring that you get the same end result. But it's we provide choices for you. You pick what your preferred way of doing. If it's especially somebody new to this and they don't know where to start, that's you would probably go to the web initializer and go click around, see what's there. Like Josh said, if your kids are giving you trouble, that's the place to be if you're a .NET developer, right? So, and here we have the app up and running in Cloud Foundry. Now, there's nothing in here that precludes it to be in Cloud Foundry, but that's where we built our things first since we work for Pivotal.
You should use the bookmark.
Oh, we should use a bookmark. We are prepared.
It's an API project, so if you go straight to the home page, you'll get a 404. So we'll just go ahead and use the bookmark.
Which one is this? It's
Yeah.
the starter one. All right. Yeah, so it's the values controller, and I didn't show you the values, but it's pulling stuff from config and also automatically enabled. And so you can go here, right? And so you have your info and health available outside Cloud Foundry, and inside Cloud Foundry. Do we have a bookmark for that?
Yeah, the last one on the right.
You have your apps manager.
And I'm signed
of
out.
course. You want to sign back in? Or?
Sure. If we're lucky, this will just work. No. Okay.
It's okay. Go ahead and just takes a second. We're giving the.
Yeah, good question.
What? You want me to sign? Oh,
No, my password is long.
Okay, let's kind of come back to that. So basically, what I was going to show is have you look at all the apps manager, the health endpoint, the info endpoint, the loggers, and all that stuff. I'm sure if you're in Pivotal Cloud Foundry, you've seen that, and through our demos, you'll have an opportunity to see some of that again. So we'll just keep going. All right, so let's get back to the presentation. Right,
Hey, that's the right slide. All right.
perfect. So we kind of talked about the CLI. Visual Studio, we have a slight POC type thing checked in there. Let us know, want to hear from you. If you're interested in seeing more of that, obviously we welcome contributions to be able to do that. So coming soon, maybe. So that's what the story is. That brings us to Steeltoe Tooling. So not to be confused with the .NET CLI and the things you've seen now, we also have another CLI experience as Steeltoe team to make it easy to manage your apps. And the vision we have is straightforward management of what we call dev pod parity, which what it means is you have your app and you push the same app into a different environment, and the tooling takes care of everything for you. So we have so far basic instance management on Docker, PaaS, Kubernetes, and the way this is built is they have a core API and CLI, which enables us to build more things as the time comes.
The core API is just it's a .NET DLL. So right now we've got a CLI for it. We can build on top of that, and anybody can do whatever they want with that core API. Just the general idea here is that a .NET developer maybe shouldn't necessarily need to care about all the ins and outs of Kubernetes and PaaS. And so at a bare minimum, this should be able to get you up and running very quickly without having to deal with all of the intricacies.
Again, there's always an opinion that makes it easy for you and defaults that make it easy. You're always welcome to opt out of that experience at any time. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. And that brings us to
what it looks like in action.
In action, yeah. So that is the Steeltoe ST command, and we're initializing a new project, and we're adding an app to it.
It doesn't do any auto discovery of what you've got presently, but there are some exploration efforts so that, presumably someday you could just say ST in it and it'll look at what you've got and maybe know exactly what you need.
Yeah, here we've just added an sample app called Simple Cloud Foundry. We added config server. Now we're targeting Docker, and you can see some diagnostic messages right under there to see where things are. And so we're deploying into the Docker environment. And so if you do a Docker PS now, you'll be able to see your containers, undeploy that. So we'll just keep going and look at different targets, basically.
The idea is that we're not doing anything super special here. We're just wrapping up the commands you would already need to know under one single interface, so that you don't need to know all the ins and outs of one or the other. You can get away with learning one set of commands, and it should do these different environments for you as needed.
Again, rinse and repeat for Kubernetes now. we've saved you so much time by not waiting for some of these things. Some of this is sped up, so but it does the same thing. So so you can see what that would look like. You can see your pods. You can you have to wait for a few seconds for the pods you've deleted. That's a new, no, not kidding. That's our Cloud Foundry target. And again, same thing.
Ready for hyperspeed? Should we go fast?
We can.
Or is it going to go fast on its own?
It's going to go fast on its own.
There you go.
There you go.
Faster. All you got to do is ask.
So that's Steeltoe Tooling, working across different targets, and that's the kind of experience we're trying to build, make it easy for developers to manage their applications. So, yeah,
Is it still playing on?
Yeah, it's playing on deploy, but we can keep going, right? Yeah. So that brings us to the new website, which Tim is going to talk about.
A little bit. We'll talk about it a little bit. The Steeltoe.io site that's been out there for the last few years has served us well, but now it's time for something a little bit new and different. We've spent some work already on getting our docs experience a little bit different from how it was before. Previously, you'd have the quick starts and the docs all on one page, and it was big and a little bit hard to manage and hard to find what you were looking for. The new site allows you to find and get started examples much faster. So if all you want to know is how do I get started in this thing, we've got some guides that get you going through how to do it local, how to do it on Cloud Foundry. Soon there's going to be more guides on how to do it on Azure Native, how to do it in whatever flavor of Kubernetes you want. Is going to be a lot more useful going forward. Additionally, just for fun, it was built with Blazor, so it's got the new shiny .NET hotness. So if you want to see Blazor in action, the source code isn't quite out there yet. It should be out there next week. Next week, all right. So we'll have that out there, and you can play around with it if you like. Give you an excuse to get your feet wet on Blazor if you haven't already, and we're looking for an excuse. Do you want us to click around? We'll click around. All right. So here's the site. It looks an awful lot like the screenshot. But for example, we might want to take a look at how to get started with service connectors. Let's take a look at Postgres. As you said, we got a tab for local. Got your basic Docker instructions. If you want to see what it looks like to run it on Cloud Foundry, your standard create service experience, list your services. A lot of this is going to be pointing you towards the initializer. So there's a lot less of put this line here, put this line there. It's just grab your quick start and get ready to go. Azure stuff. We have Azure stuff already. How awesome is that? It's changing all the time. I can't keep up. So it's like I said, it's getting started. We're moving fast already. There's all kinds of stuff to see here. So please go ahead and check it out. What's next? Other, because there's still more even after all of that we couldn't fit under any other category. So we've made some developer experience type stuff better. Has anybody worked with SourceLink before? Does anybody know what that is? So SourceLink is this great new open source way to step into the source code for a third-party library. So the way this works is we publish our debug files out to the NuGet repo server, and when you have SourceLink set up inside your application, inside Visual Studio, you can just F10 debug, and you have the option to step directly into Steeltoe's code base from your application. So if you have something going wrong inside Steeltoe from your side, just step right into it, and you can get directly at whatever's going wrong. So Hananiel is new to the team, and he's our first primarily Mac developer. So as a result of that, now Steeltoe regularly builds on OS X without having to do anything special, even the .NET Framework code, which was specifically what didn't work well before.
Yeah, if you're a Mac user, you don't have any reason to step away from it. You can build framework code on there and build obviously the .NET Core apps. So there's a lot of help for that, so that you should check that out.
We previously had requests for package signing. So as of 2 3.0, or maybe it was one of the release candidates. All the packages that we ship to NuGet.org are now signed. So you can verify that the package hasn't been tampered with. Additionally, we decided that Steeltoe wasn't the most easy to maintain across the variety of repos. So like everybody else in the space, we're down to a single repository. We're using tags to manage our images. And from our perspective, it's a lot easier to work with. It's a lot easier to find how the different Steeltoe pieces relate. And when you're looking at the source code, you can go directly from thing to thing to thing, and it's a lot easier to follow. Additionally, we moved everything from Azure DevOps. Previously, we're doing all of our CI/CD stuff with a combination of AppVeyor and Travis CI. Now it's all in one place, and it's a lot easier for us, again, to manage. And it's got prettier dashboards, and Jason gets to sign off on every release, and he's happy about that. In this process of moving to a mono repo, we determined that we needed to do something a little bit different in terms of tracking new up-and-coming features and functionality. So to that end, we have the Steeltoe OSS Incubator org for projects that may be very nice, but maybe not quite done yet. So for example, the prime candidate right now is the Steeltoe schema work that Andrew put together for us that will make it easier to work with your app settings JSON files so that you know exactly what the syntax is for how to set the URI for your config server entry. All of that help made possible by these fine people, some of them in this very room, so thank you all for that. Okay, that's what we've been working on. You want to talk about what's new?
Sure.
All right, I'm going to get it.
How are we doing on time? I kind of see it shows 10 minutes, and that doesn't sound right.
Yeah, that's wrong, that's right. So we got 30 minutes?
30 minutes, great. Got plenty of time. So what's coming up ahead is Spring Cloud Streams. How many of you here are familiar with Spring Cloud Streams? Cool. So you know, if you're familiar with that, you'll know that there are many levels, building blocks that are built one on top of each other to make this available. And I think here is another great opportunity for .NET services to coexist with the Java ecosystem and communicate, you know, with the same formats and same headers and so forth. So to do that, we've kind of begun the work to move in that direction, and we've been spending the last few months building integration, the messaging, and all the layers that allows us now to do Spring Cloud Bus, Spring Cloud config auto refresh, data flow, and so forth.
So the idea, I mean, the Spring Cloud data flow was one of the primary end in minds of this adventure. We've had requests from people to get it so that you can run .NET in Spring Cloud data flow alongside Java apps. So that's kind of what we're after. Along the way, we get things like Spring Cloud auto refresh.
Yep, and also coming ahead is we kind of talked about the JSON schema for app settings. We'll make that available everywhere for all things. We're
going to include it in all of our samples. We're going to make sure that it's easy to understand how it exists, why it exists, where to put it, how to get it, all the things you need to know about it. And yeah, and better comments throughout our libraries and better documentation, obviously for the API docs. And next up, also auto configuration. Any fans of auto configuration over here on the .NET side? Oh, I see one hand, maybe two. Yeah, so it's kind of an opinionated thing, right? And people who are from the Java Spring world, they love this. You just add one annotation and you go off to the races. Whereas on the .NET, at least from the Microsoft side, we want to be intentional about what exactly needs to happen, like what things we are adding, and be very declarative about it. So, but from our perspective, I think we should give people choices and see what they actually want to do. So this is a question mark there. It's an opportunity for you to be involved with this and you know, give pull requests, give your feedback. We'd love to hear more from you. So it's definitely not a dumb thing, but it's coming soon, maybe, again. So this is the potentially slightly touchy subject. I don't think it's any secret that Microsoft is moving more towards .NET Core with all the things they're doing. We want to be very careful about how we phrase this. We are not going to stop supporting .NET Framework by any means, but we are going to effectively fork the development. So we have a 2.x line that's going to continue to exist. It's going to continue to be supported. It may not get as many new features, but if there are features that it makes sense to put there, we will put them there and we will ship them for you. But our primary focus is going to be on ASP.NET Core because it has been made clear that that is the future. So that's where we're headed. Somewhat separately, Steeltoe has been primarily viewed by too many people as exclusively for Cloud Foundry. That was never the exclusive goal. So to that end, we are taking steps to make it more obvious that Steeltoe should work in more places, in fact, all the places. The goal is to be the microservices framework for .NET. So we are going to be intentionally doing a lot more to make sure that it works better in all those places and is documented and well supported, and there's ideas for how to do it. Okay, so the living embodiment of that sentiment is this idea of one app, many platforms. So what we mean by one app is one code base. And you should be able to, with effectively no code changes, take this app and run it in a bunch of different places. We'll get to the specifics on that later. But why does it matter? As a developer, do you want to be an expert on Azure only to be told the next week that it's cheaper to go to AWS and that's where the company's going? Maybe that happens in your organization, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Maybe you want to maintain relevancy. We're not going to judge why you might want to do this, but it is a common thing, and there's a lot of different reasons why you might want your app to be portable. That's what we're after. So we're doing our best to make abstractions that work so that you can do this. And we've already seen some of that earlier with the service discovery mechanism where you can switch between Eureka and Consul, and you might imagine some other options under the hood in the future. No surprise, it's going to have a similar vibe to the Spring Cloud ecosystem. Yep. So the one app in question happens to be the music store that we're working with on this project. You may be familiar with it. That image has probably not changed in like 10 years. We've been discussing how much we hate the UI, so we might clean it up a bit. But this has been Microsoft's kind of canonical example for how MVC works and how to do all the ins and outs of things with MVC. Steeltoe previously blew it out into microservices. We now have a music service, a shopping cart service, an order service, and they all can be deployed independently, but we're considering it to be one app. We use Spring Cloud to tie them all together, and once we had them all tied together, we threw on some health management things, as you might expect, and recently, since we're now branching out from Cloud Foundry, needed some way to keep track of the actuators. How's the health doing? What's the logging look like? So we've added Spring Boot Admin for this exercise. And now that gives us a dashboard so we can view all that stuff in one place. Except for tracing. Tracing is still separate, so we have Zipkin for that with support previously added. And of course, this all has Hystrix in it because fault tolerance is a thing. So we tolerate faults via Hystrix. In this process, we also had ASP.NET Core 3.0 released. So we figured now was probably the best time to get started digging in on that. We did find a couple of issues with Steeltoe as it was. So there's some work that we have to do before Steeltoe works across the board with ASP.NET Core 3.0. So if you're looking for that experience, we should have it sorted out in the next couple of weeks, at least for a better than day one story. So look for that coming soon. One of the issues we discovered is that ASP.NET Core servers have synchronous I/O disabled by default, which kind of gets in the way of a lot of the ways that many traditional applications have been using Newtonsoft. So we've also had some mixed feelings about Newtonsoft in general, so we're potentially looking at either adjusting the way we're using it or getting rid of it altogether where possible and using some of Microsoft's new ways of interacting with JSON that could be more performant and definitely will cause fewer version issues for downstream applications.
Yeah, if you're more interested in that, you can always look at the music store, the mini apps branch on our sample and look at the changes that were made. There's not a whole lot of commits, so you can follow along and get more insight into this. This is what we've discovered so far.
So what does many platforms mean? Well, we work for Pivotal, so obviously it means a Pivotal platform. That means PaaS, as most of our samples have been to date, but it does also mean PKS, so no surprises there. It's .NET, Microsoft, so Microsoft seems like the next logical place to go. So we've been working on deploying it to Azure, making sure that it works in all the places that it makes sense to run a .NET application in Azure. From there, we're looking at the next cloud leader, AWS. So obviously we're going to AWS, we're taking this application, we're shipping it there where it makes sense to put it. Can't leave Google out of the game, so we're going to take a look at GCP and deploy to GCP, where you would run a .NET application. And all these have Kubernetes, so of course we're going to run on vanilla Kubernetes. Again, no surprise there. So does anybody want to see what it actually looks like? We're not going to look at that one. It's going to pull right back up again. All right. As we were saying, this is all already out on our GitHub in our samples repo. We've been working right out there where everybody can watch, which is always a little fun. But the music store, for the most part, as it previously existed, did not need a whole lot of changes. So the music store, as we mentioned, is 4 different applications. And the main places we've made some changes in this effort have been, so far, in just the program CS. I think the only significant change was to add the Azure app configuration if we're running in an environment that we've defined to contain Azure. So this is still very much early days. So right now, when we deploy to Azure environments where we want to use the Azure app configuration service, we're just saying, hey, this is an Azure environment, so go ahead and use Azure app configuration. And as it exists today, because Steeltoe doesn't know how to look at these things today, we've got this manual switch built in. And I want to say that's the only thing that we've done to really set all this up.
Yeah, you can expect that this kind of code will go away when this is fully productionized, right? Like it'll automatically discover where we are and do the right thing.
Okay, our startup files are not the shortest. So this is part of where we talk about maybe wanting to adjust the auto configuration story. So if you want to add a whole bunch of actuators, you're going to have a few lines like this to set up all the ones that you want, which isn't necessarily always the most ideal. It does align with ASP.NET core principles about being explicit about what you want and configuring it the way you want, but sometimes that's painful. So the idea is that we're investigating is how can we make it less painful? How can we make it easier to get up and running? All right. The code isn't too exciting across the rest of the music store applications. It's a collection of web APIs. It's a web UI. So I'm not going to drill through all of that source code. But the part where we spent a fairly significant amount of time is with all the scripting involved to get all of this stuff up and running. So I've spent probably the last month in PowerShell, for better or for worse. One thing that's kind of neat to know, if you didn't know already, PowerShell core is actually now cross-platform. So we can take one script and we can run it on OS X, we can run it on Linux, we can run it on Windows. So I'm over here on Windows doing my thing with PowerShell, and Hananiel can pick it up and just take it away from there. Yep. So these scripts, while they are currently mostly tailor-made for the music store example, do provide a framework that you might be interested in following for how to programmatically spin up and destroy environments. So one of the ones I spent the most amount of time in was the Azure container instances. So this goes through and it creates resource groups. It can optionally log you in. We're dealing with private registries. We're dealing with shipping containers. We're dealing with creating images. The Azure app config source, which is still pretty new, but it's a thing now, so you can make use of it. What's that? Nuke? Yes, well, that would be an option too. Maybe we'll take a look at that next. Andrew is a big proponent of Nuke for building and shipping applications, and he yells at me every time I don't use it, so maybe it's time. We go with what we know sometimes. So, does anyone want to actually see this thing deployed somewhere? We'll see if I'm still logged into GCP. Okay. We could go ahead and show you on all the different platforms, but it's effectively the same thing, right? We're running the same application, the same backing services. GCP happens to do a very convenient job of putting it all in one place with clickable links. So from here, we can see a Eureka dashboard that has the music service, the music store, order processing, shopping cart, all of it registered. So we know that service discovery with Eureka is working here. We don't necessarily need Spring Cloud Eureka in play here. Obviously, there's the underlying service discovery mechanisms available in Kubernetes, but we happened to pick up Spring Boot admin with Eureka configuration, just to conveniently add all the applications. And so now we have a dashboard. And this was set up this way with with Eureka.
Yeah. So while Kubernetes has its native service discovery, and you would say, why would you want to use this over that? The fact that your developer is familiar with the set of tools and a way of doing things is investment that your organization has made in that opinion. So the Spring Cloud opinion, so to speak. So by making that available to other teams that are maybe using .NET in your organization, you can leverage that investment that you put into that. So that's what we're trying to show here. Not to recommend that you would do this, but if you're already there, why not? It runs, right? So, and it not only does it run, it now makes all these things available in Spring Boot admin, and now you're familiar with all these tools and ways of setting up. So there's a case to be made for that.
So the music store itself, of course, is up and running. And it is reaching the music store. I know because my IDs are not really screwy. One of the places we plugged Hystrix in was with the communications with the music service. So if the music service were down, the IDs for the albums start with like 99999. So it's real obvious if you know what's happening that it's down, but also that it's still successfully using the fallbacks. Yeah. So we can confirm that our shopping cart service works, and I'm not going to go through and place an order, but then the order service works and all of that. Okay.
So do you want to look at Zipkin traces?
I'm going to let you drive that one.
Okay.
This is one of those exercises where like we've just been working up until the last minute, plugging more and more in because there's always more to do.
Yeah.
So this one was plugged in, what, 2 days ago?
Yeah. As soon as we finish one environment, Tim goes, oh, you want to run it in PKS? Yeah, sure. Why don't we do that? And so we've run it in PKS. And by the way, that was a very pleasant experience. If nobody has tried PKS, it was almost like for all of the things, if I had to have a preference, I love GCP, and PK was just as nice, and you have the secure private registry with Harbor and the scanning and everything that happens there. So that's a fantastic place for you to run your .NET applications, Java applications, whatever, right? And so here, basically, Tim just clicked through the shopping cart and a few things, so we are able to see these traces. They're sorted by the longest first, right? And so these are recent, and you can drill into things. You can also let's go back and see if you can find your dependencies, right? Like you can visualize your dependencies. There's nothing new here except that this is stuff that we built for one environment, and it's completely portable. And that was our main idea with one app and many platforms. And you can take this tooling and these ways of doing this and take it multiple places. So that's Zipkin.
I think that was all we wanted to show about how we did this. I think we'd like to leave some time for questions in case anybody has anything burning on their mind. Go ahead and close this. Kick it back into the slides. I think I got one about our takeaways here, hopefully. Nope, forgot to make that slide. Awesome. One of the other things that we had coming up was gaps that we identified. One of the things that I struggled with when we were talking about deploying to Kubernetes is like, what's the right way to get a service? So at the time that we did the port to ASP.NET Core 3.0, we had an issue with Entity Framework Core not supporting anything other than the Microsoft SQL Server, which is not an uncommon problem in the Microsoft Entity Framework world. So we had to figure out how we wanted to deploy SQL Server. And I don't know that we necessarily took the right answer off the bat, but we decided that it's really easy to deploy a Docker image. So that's what we did for now. But we've also experimented a bit with some of the managed identity stuff in Azure, which is relatively straightforward and pretty easy to use. But in the Kubernetes world, there's this thing called the service catalog, which, as I understand it, is still in beta. But it looks like something that we're going to be ending up supporting. And it has a means of providing credentials, and it looks not completely dissimilar to the VCAP variables in Cloud Foundry. So we're more than likely, in the very, very near future, going to be providing support for plugging up credentials into your application via Steeltoe connectors from the Service Catalog API. That's a lot of words. And since I didn't make the slide, I don't remember what else we had going. So hopefully somebody's got a question that'll jog my memory on what else we should have learned. So some additional resources before we get to questions. There's a couple other sessions that I'd like to highlight. This is a small audience. It's a .NET audience mostly, so I'm sure you guys have already found all the other .NET tracks that are interesting. It's a pretty short list. There's an additional further deep dive that Dave did a great talk on Steeltoe management last year at Spring One, I think this one was from. So there's a lot more about the actuators, and I believe that one also covers some of the interoperability with Java. Of course, there's a link to our website.
Yeah, that's between Java and .NET. It has one Java app and one .NET app, both working together at the same time. So that's, I think, a great story to tell, especially if you're in an environment that uses both. Right?
Okay, any questions? Anything we didn't show that you want to see? We kind of glossed over some of the finer details, but the story at this point was that from a certain perspective, you can make it just work if you just deploy things that you're already using in a new place. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you can do it now. One kind of like previously you had to pass it open to get the secure information, and then you didn't have a way to expose that externally.
So the question is, are you asking for multiple auth mechanisms on the health endpoint?
No, I didn't get to my questions. The question is,
okay.
The new way. Basically, you're saying you can do both now, like one that gives you the basic information and one that gives you the more detailed information.
Are you talking about management endpoints? Yeah. Okay, so the question is about management endpoints, and the question is, you have done something that makes it available both internal to Cloud Foundry and externally. Was that your question?
Is that what it is?
Yeah, that is exactly what that is, and what we're now able to do, and Spring Boot apps people using Spring Boot Actuator always were able to do this. They would deploy a Spring Boot app to Cloud Foundry, and you have the apps manage integration. You could see your health loggers and all that stuff. And not only that, you could hit it at /actuators/ whatever, and they would be available. Now they've made a few transitions from 1 to 2, where they were using Spring Security to secure those endpoints. But since then, they've said, let the developer take care of security, but we will give you defaults to not accidentally expose information. So right, by default, you saw that only health and info were available. So that's something that you can configure with the expose setting, and you can expose more. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah, that's exactly what that was. Yeah, so another feature there is with the health actuator, you can actually say whether you want to show details, set it to yes or no, and by default it's yes, but you can set it to no, and then it would just show you the up and down, not expose any information. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Please.
With the district's dashboard being removed, is there any plans on replacing that somehow?
It has to do with how we export metrics, and there are plans that we will do something. I believe Prometheus is the story. They have to get to Prometheus somehow. In terms of actually starting that work, I mean, you saw how much other stuff we already did. So, it's on. We are aware that it is something that we need to take care of very, very soon. So I don't have a prescription for that problem yet, but I think Prometheus is involved.
Yeah, for the circuit breaking aspect of things, there's also Poly, that's a popular framework for .NET developers. So that's something we'll also be looking at. So part of what we want to do is create abstractions that let you replace multiple implementations in this space, similar to maybe not how similar that is to, like the Spring Cloud team is going with resilience. There's no equivalent for that on our side. So it's kind of similar to that we'll let people use multiple tools, pick and choose what they'd like. Yeah. Cool. If there are no more questions, so we can wrap this up. We'll be available outside. If you want to reach out to us, we'd love to hear from you, see how people are using our libraries. So thank you once again for being here and listening to us.
Or find us on Slack or Twitter or whatever.
And that's our Slack.
Yeah.